I encourage everyone to take a moment and breathe and take a tea cheers with a Jiri tea. A Jiri tea recognizes the beauty in shared stories and shared opportunities. Ajiri sources award-winning tea from Kenya, employs women in the region to handcraft the labels, and sends 100% of the profits back to the region to support orphan education. Save 10% on your order of Kenyan teas and coffee with the code BeautifullyHuman at ajiritea.com. AJIRIT.com. Tea mugs up. Hello and welcome to the Beautifully Human podcast. I'm Nick Sheesby. In this podcast, I speak with beautiful humans from all around the world, sharing with you their incredible stories, revealing the power in every human story, to spread love and humanity to a world that is in desperate need of it, to show that we can all connect in beautiful ways, no matter where we come from or what we look like. What you will find out is that we are all beautifully human. Let's all be beautifully human. Hello again, and welcome to the Beautifully Human podcast. Today I am hanging out with Sonia Lewis, and what a badass, self-proclaimed badass. From a very young age, she realized when she was seeing the world and seeing how people were being treated at this young age that she wasn't going to stand for it. And I'll let her tell you the rest of that story, but just know she is a badass. The second she starts speaking, you'll figure that out. If you enjoy this podcast, follow along on Spotify and on Instagram at the Beautifully Human Podcast. Rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts. It helps get these stories to more people. And as always, enjoy this beautiful conversation. All right, so I'm very excited to have you on here, and I love to start these out with a very broad, overarching question and let you run with it and take the conversation wherever it may go and say, tell me the story of your life.
Ooh, that is a big overarching question. The way I start off telling the story of my life is that a very Midwestern girl who grew up in the projects, my mother, met a very country Southern boy from Texas, um, my father, who worked his youth on cotton fields in California. Both of them were escaping, so to speak, their childhoods. And so they met in California, and I assume was produced soon after they were married. Um, it's ironic as to who I am in community, because one of the things people tell me, I do a lot of social justice work. Um, I've been very vocal over my lifetime, but I started off as a child of a somewhat quasi Black Panther, my mother, and a first one of the first officers to black officers to integrate the Richmond Police Department in the Bay Area.
Wow.
And my father lost his job with the police department because he refused to give intel back to his department about the Panthers. And yes, so
Wow.
isn't that a mix of something to,
Yeah.
that's how my life began. And then I can remember flip ahead at age 7, I made the decision, very clear and distinct decision, that I would no longer say the Pledge of Allegiance because of the last line in the Pledge of Allegiance, liberty and justice for all. We had just finished up a lesson on the Statue of Liberty, so I had a pretty good grasp of what liberty meant. And then I asked adults in my life what justice meant, and it didn't match what, they were telling me were the definitions. So I made a decision not to say the pledge at 7 years old. I got into a lot of trouble. This was in the 70s.
Yeah.
And my mother knew from that moment going forward that I would be a handful, or at least that I would be very vocal about the things that I wanted and didn't want in life.
Yeah.
Um, I went on through school being probably an overachiever, which I don't always recommend. I recommend that people compete with themselves and be their best. But I had this notion that I had to leave my neighborhood in order to make an impact. And which in reality that I know now is that my neighborhood needs me to make an impact, the neighborhoods that I grew up in. And so I went off to college in Atlanta, Georgia, earned a degree, 2 degrees in history and psychology, became a history teacher. And then I became a whistleblower, which forced me out of the classroom. And that's how I started Ascribe Educational Consulting. So that's kind of a nutshell. And there's lots of details in there that are missing, but that's
Yeah.
kind of a nutshell.
Wow. Yeah. Your mom and your dad, the very like the
The
two
dichotomy of
polar
that.
opposites.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
how did they handle that?
It's funny. As a kid, I never remember my dad coming home in his police uniform. Granted, this was a very short-lived career for him, right?
Okay.
Because he was within 18 months or so, he was fired because he refused to bring back intel. He was heavily hazed by the white officers that were had established the department and were like, "We're not ready to integrate." And so it was a very short-lived career. But what I do remember is that we had these conversations that dad is a cop. We're not talking about it in the community. We're not talking about it in with family. And he never came home in his police uniform. So I do remember that piece, right? But I also remember my dad being um, very deliberate about, I am a black man in America, and I am raising you to be a very proud, black woman in America. And so all of the things that your mother is doing is absolutely correct, and we are going to live this life. He just compartmentalized that very separate from, family. He just felt like that might be a stepping stone,
Hmm.
that he could impact community. But we will never know if that could have been true, because he was soon after released from the department.
Wow. That's a
Yeah,
bit wow. So much with that. That is crazy.
absolutely.
And I
And
mean,
in the past 5 years, I've been a leader with Black Lives Matter, Sacramento, my local chapter. And
yeah.
so people ask me all the time, "Oh, you have a parent who was a cop." I'm like, "Hold on, let me give you
Yeah.
some context to this story."
Yeah, and I like the way you phrased it in there of saying we'll never know what kind of impact you could have had in that department because of not bringing back intel, because I think there has to be people in that system that are trying to fix it from the inside, because from the outside it seems impossible.
Yeah. Yeah. He still has memories of, there were five, black officers that year who were charged with integrating the department. They all were newly Vietnam veterans who were released from the war. And that was the initiative. And within a 2 year span, all five of them had been, released. So you never know what the impact those five officers could have made, especially in a community that was very diverse, right? Even though it was segregated, it still was diverse in the sense that, the city had a plethora of different cultural groups who were represented.
Yeah. Wow. Um, talk to me about the Pledge of Allegiance. Talk to me about that story. How I can't imagine that went well for you, but just talk to me about what you were feeling and all of that.
Yeah. So at 7, I still rely upon 7-year-old Sonia to make sure that I'm courageous. Because I still say, is one of the most badass girls that I know, on the face of the earth. I just recently wrote this into a children's book about courage, and that even 7-year-olds can, lead the way, and that our voice is important. But I just read, like I said, I think it was a culmination of incidences that led me to that decision. So one, we had just finished this lesson on the Statue of Liberty. And so I was trying to wrap my brain around, what is liberty and how does that manifest, and what are these freedoms these people are talking about, because there are rules all around us. And mind you, 7 years old, right? So what does that tell us about the 7-year-old brain? That we know one right from wrong, and we can come to some conclusions based on what we see around us. And so I would just imagine, without, taking myself back there, completely, is that 7-year-old Sonia was probably confused about the language that was
Mm.
used in the pledge. And so, and all of this coupled with the fact that now by this time, by age 7, My father was no longer a police officer, and he had come home really, really upset because one of my cousins who was just didn't have the adult mental capacity to be an adult. He was like a child in an adult body. He was the best person to play with. He was the best park buddy. I loved him dearly. And I overheard my father say that the police had killed him. And and it was during an episode where he was having a very mental manic episode. And so I can just remember, like, what am I going to do? I'm only 7. I can't do it much. But I knew that this line, liberty and justice for all, didn't fit the scenario that I saw in my neighborhood. And so I think those things motivated me to really make that decision. But I can remember I went to Woodrow Wilson Elementary School, which is now Michelle Obama Elementary School.
That's awesome.
And Miss Billieu was my teacher, right? I
Yeah.
love the fact that the name has been changed.
Yes. So good.
Um, Miss Billieu was the oldest teacher on campus. She had a reputation of being the meanest teacher on campus. And that year, we had gotten a very young, progressive principal who was newly hired. And when I kept getting sent out of class because I wouldn't say the Pledge of Allegiance and I wouldn't write the lines on the chalkboard. So take yourself back to the days of
Oh
chalkboards,
man.
not
Yeah.
whiteboards, right?
Yeah.
Um, all of my recesses, all of my lunch times were taken away, and I was given after school detention on a regular, just like every day, until she felt like she can break me. And I was like, I'm just gonna make your life a living hell until I feel like I can break you.
Yeah.
But Miss Reno, our principal, was really like interested in how I had come to this conclusion. And so she really like took me under her wing and wanted to protect me as a 7-year old. And so instead of me being stuck in Miss Billieu's class to serve out these punishments, she would make sure that I was in the office. She had goodies and treats and snacks and things for me. She really wanted to protect me. And at the end of the day, when I graduated from elementary school, I was our graduation speaker. Miss Reno was still there. Miss Billieu was no longer there. That school year, Miss Billieu retired. And when Miss Reno introduced me as the graduation speaker, she said, this kid doesn't realize how much easier she made my life when one teacher in particular retired, and it's all due to her. So, what can I say?
Badass is what you can
Yeah,
say.
yeah,
Yeah. It is amazing as kids what you see and what you are learning at that time. And I think that it's just so sad to me when hatred comes out later or they just see it because as a kid you're just what you're surrounded with is what you know,
yeah,
and you have to learn all this other stuff. And if you're seeing this hatred and it hasn't made sense to me for a very long time, but I think that's amazing that you saw it and said, no, fuck that. I'm not gonna write it on your board. I'm not gonna say it because it's not there.
right. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a piece that I reflect on, my entire life. I say that was my first form of protest. My mom probably would say that probably wasn't your first form of protest. That's the one that I can articulate and, be very specific about the details of, right? And that just has led me, a lot of my friends growing up in elementary and middle school and high school, they would say I was the bully of the bully. So anytime I saw injustice, I was like, hold on, like, why are we doing this? And I would, try to talk people through. My friends tell me when I was young that I was very much like the listener and the fixer. And I think I took that and I internalized it in a lot of ways that maybe wasn't as healthy as I needed it to be, because I was always giving to someone else. Unfortunately, infants in this world, when you are giving, sometimes you forget to give to yourself. But at 50, I figured it out. Like, I have to, balance this thing. So it is really a testament to what I lean on as the core foundation of my integrity and character comes from 7-year-old Sonia.
Oh, it's so beautiful, and I think it's. I love how you said that you're such a listener too, and like that's so important when you're helping people. And how how did it affect your friends when you were standing up and the bully to the bully? I think that's a great. I think we all should be the bully to the bully, because if they get away with it forever, then we're all just stuck under feet, you know. And so, how did your friends how did they react to it?
You know, I was always that kid in the neighborhood where, you know, the other kids would be like, go get Sonia, she'll figure it out. And I would be, okay, so what's the problem? You know, and I show up, I'm like, I considered myself an alien for a lot of times. I'd be like, you guys don't get it? Like, how are we not treating people with kindness? Not nice, like, because I feel like nice is not good enough.
Yeah.
I'm talking about inherently kind. How are we really and truly lifting humanity? How are we really helping people to realize that their voice and their presence is important, and that we don't have to all subscribe to the same stereotype of being the robot, you know, that American society can sometimes produce. So I oftentimes saw myself as an alien, but you know, the alien was called upon to, you know, so you know, I grew up on Mork and Mindy, so I would be like, you know, right? So
Yes. So
let me
good.
be the alien, and how are we going to figure this out? And so that's how my friends often you know, treated me and relied on me in community is, let's see what Sonia would say about this. And I appreciated it. But it was very labor intense, and I was the kid who, you know, ran for office at every level, elementary, middle school, and high school. I gave our graduation speeches at all of those levels, and it was like a matter of how do we figure out ways to treat each other more kind in community. That was my whole goal and intention in life, and it still really and truly is my whole intention in life, is how do we treat people better.
Yeah. Yeah, and I like how you say that. Like, nice people. I think people can go, "Oh, I'm a nice person," but it's not good enough. You got to go far deeper than that, and treat people with true kindness and without any other thing except the respect, because you're another human. And
Right.
it's so hard to find, of course, in what we're dealing with today and for forever in this country.
Forever, right?
And man, I just also thinking about how you had to take all that on. That had to be so tough.
You know, the probably the challenging part when I realized, when I was forced to become a whistleblower. I had been 17 years into my teaching career. I was running and had built up this program that was a small academy here in California. And that just means that the State Department of Education gave my program extra funds to meet the needs of marginalized students, right? And so I have done very well in building this program. And I discovered into year two and a half, three, that my principal was siphoning off funds from my program. And I was responsible for signing on the dotted line. Like I felt like the accountability piece was solely left on my shoulders, right? And I've always been a very literal person. When my mom said, you do this, I was like, okay, I got you, right?
Yeah.
And so I was forced to become this whistleblower. And when I said that I wouldn't sign, you know, he was like, are you sure you want to make that decision? I said, absolutely. Because
Yeah.
if they come back and ask me about this money, they're not coming to my bank account. And what it led to was a principal for the first time ever releasing me from a position. And the district then had to negotiate with me because I refused to, you know, quit. I was under contract and I had done nothing wrong. And the
Right.
union had cited that I had done nothing wrong. And so I decided, at the advice of my doctor and my lawyer, to play the system at its own game. And so my doctor was like, you're suffering from a little bit of anxiety and depression because of, you know, all that you've been through with this experience. And I want to take you off on medical leave. And so in my mind, as a Black woman, that's like, wait, one thing that we don't do is succumb to mental health challenges like that, right? Or at least back then, that was just not the norm. Today, I'm
Sure.
like, no, if you having a mental health crisis, let's address that.
Right.
We just didn't have the language 20 years ago to, you know, embrace people where they were with their mental health challenges. And so I remember very emphatically that I made the decision I wasn't going to take medication, but I was eager, to figure out ways to be off work and still get paid, and just figure out what my next move was going to be. And they had literally said I had 3 years to decide. So I was
Hmm.
like, okay, I have time,
Yeah.
and you're going to pay me on top of that. So then that's when I just moved into the decision of I'm going to become an entrepreneur so that I never find myself in a situation where someone else has my whole future in their hands.
Yeah.
And so I think that's very indicative when I connect the dots to who I am as an individual, that one, I stood up to, the power structure, right? But it wasn't the first time that I had stood up to the power structure. The part that was different as an adult was the realization that, okay, do I have faith in my talents and abilities to do something else? How can I now transform this into something that is going to be of benefit and help to the greater good of humanity?
Yeah. And that badass 7-year-old came through, kept
Came
swinging.
through. Yes.
I love that. And so, is that when you started to do a scribe?
It is. So it was 2009, and one of my friends who had also been released from her position because we were both, identified as people who knew that the principal had stolen money. Um, it was about a year of being out on depression leave, and she came and got me one day for my birthday. She said, "Let's go to lunch," and we literally sat at a breakfast table and we wrote out our vision for this business on napkins. And we knew that over this year that we had been off, that we wanted to continue to help young people, that we wanted to be a resource in the community, and that we wanted to make sure that we were creating programs that were going to change the equity lens when it comes to education. And that's how Ascribe was born.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
And so, and it's still going, obviously. And so, how has it grown? How has it progressed? Like, what? Talk to me about it. It's so cool.
It is. I am 100% super loving it now. It has had its ebbs and flows, and there have been times in my the past 12 years where family members, my husband, my friends are like, "Can you get a real job today because you're too smart to be sitting at home doing nothing?" And I'm so glad that I didn't succumb to that pressure. But again, that's indicative of who I am as a person, that I never followed the crowd. I never did what everyone else was doing. And so when in the beginning we started off with creating programs when kids were transitioning from high school to the real world. So what that looked like was helping the marginalized students on campus, which most of the time were Black and brown students, foster youth, LGBTQ plus students. We would help them with their transition plan, be it filling out college applications, writing essays, scholarships, or going into the career of the workforce, right? And then schools would say, "Oh my God, I heard you were doing this program with these kids. Can you come in and do that for a group of kids at my school?" So it led to me getting contracts in for specific school sites. And then from there, I would just hear when incidences would happen that weren't so just right when it came to equity or when it came to race relations, and I would offer my advice and opinion. And then I would be called in to do work around climate and culture. Now George Floyd happens, right? And I can come in and I literally don't have to tiptoe around the work that we're doing. I come in and I say, "I'm here to do anti-racism work. How
Yeah.
are you going to help me do that?" And we don't tiptoe around it anymore. So this year has been extremely busy.
Sure.
Um, and I'm very grateful for it, but it's very overwhelming in the sense that, like, I've been saying this for 10 years at least. And now you want to throw all of these dollars at making sure that teachers and classrooms and administrators are doing and saying the right things, when it sometimes feels to me very performative, because it feels like you're just checking a box or crossing the
Sure.
T's, dotting the I's. And so I make very meaningful trainings that are safe spaces for people to talk about race. I want to encourage people to be brave in those moments, and even lift the fact that even if there's silence, think of silence as an opportunity for change and growth, but at the same time, recognize that silence can be violence to those who are at the hand being oppressed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I can. Man, I've just been hearing so much about the critical race theory and everything and the fight against it right now. And I it's just mind blowing. I mean, even on my end, which is a very privileged side of that debate, but I just I know you said it's been busy this year. Do you see it like as not performative? Do you see it as actually like taking meaningful steps forward right now?
I do see a lot of my clients being very intentional on the way that they're approaching their trainings. And then I do have some clients who are very like, we just need to do a one and done professional development. And I have the choice, to say yay or nay, right? I have the choice to, really and truly say no. Whereas before, I felt like I was almost obligated to participate because it was like if you drop a seed, just maybe that one seed would germinate into something. You're leaving something behind. But now I have a little bit more leverage in crafting something that is long lasting. I have a little bit more leverage in demanding longer contracts, right? Because they now have more money to spend on these programs. And so that makes it nice. And I am seeing change. And people who are in this industry who do this work that I'm talking to, we are having these conversations and we're seeing change. We're seeing more people say, yes, this is wrong. And I'm here. I may not have all the answers, but I'm here to listen and to try. And so I just really and truly appreciate people who are willing to listen and try, because that at least is a recognizing of like, we're not perfect. We don't have all the answer. And I raise my hand almost, at least once a week and say, even as a Black woman who's experienced been on the other end of racism, that I don't have all the answers either.
Sure. Yeah, that's where I struggle with is like I don't have all the answers. I guess what would be a practical way for people in their community who are willing to listen and want to get involved? Look, what's a very practical way to just kind of join in and be an ally?
Absolutely. I once would just encourage people to don't lean so heavily on the Black, Indigenous, people of color that to educate you around these nuances, right? To be willing to do some of your own homework is super important. That shows your vestedness in this process. But at the same time, it's very important to surround yourself and understand the dynamics of power. So those who lack those who have the least amount of power, center them in those conversations. Lean on their voices and opinions and experiences, because that will kind of dictate where we can go with growing what equity looks like. There's lots and lots and lots of books that are, out. I cannot tell you, I probably over the past year have probably bought 50 books because I do this as a living, but I recommend, certain books. Ibram Kendi's work on how to be an anti-racist is huge right now. Bettina Love's book on We Want to More Than Survive gives people a perspective about the Black and BIPOC community that, we've been forced because of systems to survive based on the rules that you set out, right? And so I would just urge people also not to, settle for being an ally. I made the declaration on December 31st, 2020, that ally shit died, right? And what that means to me is that you can no longer throw up a hashtag. You can no longer throw dollars at a cause. You can no longer show up at an event and then go home to your cushy homes and live in that privilege. And so I'm really encouraging people to be abolitionists. I need accomplices in this work, right? An accomplice, in my opinion, will put their body on the line for mine because they recognize that mine is going to get brutally beat up way more than theirs would. And so that's the work, that I tell people. This is not about individuals. This is about fighting systems, right? Because at some point or another in that conversation, I want to urge people that you weren't a slave master and I wasn't a slave, right? But because of who we are and how this thing has shaped out, there are some benefits and privileges, and then there's some oppression and harm. And so that's the recognition that I need people to settle in. Like, can we agree that systemic racism is a thing? And that's the question that I have. And if you can say yes to that, then we can have a conversation. But if you say, oh, we live in America and there's no racism, it's a melting pot, and I don't believe in color, I don't see color, I don't have time for those kind of conversations.
Yeah, and you're not there. That's just living in massive
Right.
ignorance. If you're
Right.
just saying, "Oh, there's no racism, there's no color, I'm colorblind," it's like,
Right.
come on.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
These things wouldn't have to happen like after George Floyd. Like these wouldn't have like all these movements wouldn't have to be here if it was equitable for everybody right now. That's just and if you don't think that people's human rights are being taken all the time, then again, that's massive ignorance.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we can connect it to, and we've been having this conversation at least here in my area of town, and I'm in some state spaces and some national spaces where we're having these conversations as well as to who is the target of white supremacy. And so when folks recognize that the target is on their back too, then how can we then begin to collaborate and stand in solidarity with each other without looking at each other like with that side eye? I don't know if I can trust you, right? And so because of the pandemic that we've experienced and Asian hate being a really legitimate thing, how then can we unite, right? When I think about, the Muslim struggles and the Palestinian struggles, when I think about, trans women of color being brutally attacked all over this country day in and day out, it's like, how, I tell people in my community, how can you be Black and then hate queer folks in our community? How
Right.
can you justify that, right? My dad is 76 years old, and I can remember when one of my cousins, she's also my goddaughter and he's her godfather, came out of the closet and told, everyone, I'm gay. And I was like, okay, so now what are we going to, now that I know, how can I be of assistance? And her biggest thing was, I want to be able to tell your dad. I want him to be able to still support me. And I know that my dad's a preacher now.
Mm-hmm.
And so very religious, but I know the heart of my father, right? And so it took 10 years of conversations around this topic. 2 months ago, he called me and he said, you're one of the smartest people that I know. I need you to explain to me what this term queer is. And
Hmm.
I so appreciate that, because 10 years ago, it was like, my cousin is going to hell. She has committed this sin by just being a gay girl, right? And so now I can go to him and be like, there are so many other terms that I can hip you to. Let's have
Yeah.
a conversation. And now, but he's open now, right?
Yeah.
Because I asked him to think about when you were young. I know that there had to be someone in your community that people may have said, and caused you to question. And he about 3 years ago, he said there was this guy in the church. I said, yes, in the church,
In
because
the church. Yeah, yeah.
in the church, he said, and all of the elders in the church used to tell them, stay away from him because he's not living his life right. He's a sinner. And yeah, he may be able to sing and he may be able to play the piano, but he's still going to hell. And so I asked my dad, I said, what if one of you all had stuck up for him? Didn't he have the right to have people to advocate for him? And he said, it's been a 3-year process of me revisiting that question that you posed to me. And so now when he hears new terms that's new to him,
Yeah.
he'll call and he'll say, hey, can you explain this? And we can have a conversation, which is really, really beautiful. I just love, the space when people are able to open and just listen.
Yeah, it's so important. I mean, on all of these topics, but yeah, I mean, like, I think it's hard for me because the church I grew up in is just very unaccepting of LGBTQ, and I came from a predominantly Republican, very white community too, and it just wasn't talked about, or it was just kind of like pushed away. And even now, it's like, especially around the LGBTQIA, it's like, why are you using this religion to hate people? I
Absolutely.
mean, if you look at the base of it, it's love and acceptance of all people. And truly, if you're going to be the people that you read about in the Bible, when everybody else turns their back on that person, you should be the one there saying, we accept you, meet them in the middle, and then talk to them about what you believe and everything. And that's one that never made sense to me. And I love that your dad's just asking and makes those calls like, hey, what's this one?
Absolutely.
It's so beautiful.
I tell people to think about it this way. Every person, I don't care who you are, what background you come from, every family has someone who is either in the LGBTQIA plus community or someone who has been formerly incarcerated. And my question to you is, don't they too deserve love? Don't they too deserve for people to care about them? And so that's, the question I get people to, really think about things from their basic things, right? Like when we have these conversations about race, it's like, can you agree that racism prevents some people from excelling? And if we can agree that that's a foundation, right? And then we can build on that. And so I also infuse those two other examples because that begins to open the door of, I can remember, Uncle Sonny or, Trish, who I didn't know if she was, a girl. We used to call her Butchie, So
Right.
I asked the questions. Did you ever ask Trish what she wanted to be called?
Right.
And so that's kind of where I am in these spaces, and all of them are connected because we all at the core just want to be accepted and loved.
Right. Yeah, and I think I think it's such a beautiful way. It's what I try to do is just like meet somebody and be like, look, how can you don't know this person, you don't know anything about them, what they've been through, but you've been through shit in your life.
Right.
And you have been mistreated by somebody. You got bullied by somebody. You fill in whatever descriptor that happened in your life. And I don't care what you look like, it's happened to you. And if you can internalize that and go, well, God damn it, that sucked. And now I'm actively doing that to somebody. If you can at least look in yourself and go, hey, somebody's made fun of me in life. Not one person in this world has gone through life without being made fun of. It's not possible. So if you can at least internalize that and go, okay, that I remember how I felt at that point, and then say, why would I ever want to make somebody feel like that or constantly make someone feel that way?
Right. Absolutely. It's crazy. And it leads to, that part of the conversation where I try to challenge people to take it a step further when, the fear sets in as I'm having these conversations in these spaces, sometimes in corporate America, sometimes where it's not a lot of, black women, BIPOC people all together. And so I have to get down to the root of what the fear is, especially for white men. And it's a challenge. And the fear always goes back to I'm afraid that someone's going to take away, the success or the sustainability or the privilege that I have. And I'm like, this isn't about taking anything away from anyone. This is about equity. This is about making sure that other people have access to the things that you have as well. And so that's the scary part, right? That's when the silence begins to sit in. Yeah. But I encourage people to don't sit in that silence too long. Embrace what that silence is really telling them and let their heart be the guide of it. And then have conversations with young people, because young people, they are really like, I'm so appreciating the young people who I'm constantly around. They're like, we are about breaking generational curses. And I'm like, well, dang it, I wish I knew that term when I was a kid, because that would totally describe the kind of kid that I was. And so I was seen as the black sheep of the family because I didn't subscribe to, this is the way we do it because we're black. No, we don't have to do it that way, because I can like Pat Benatar. I'm sorry, because Pat Benatar is badass. Like,
yeah, I was just gonna say, you're badass. She's badass.
I can't like Cyndi Lauper. What? Why? Like, so I can remember those things as a kid growing up in my community, being told you can't do this because you are black and you won't represent us well. Well, I can still dance and I can do the things that make us okay, but I can also bring things to our neighborhood and our community and to the tables that we sit and have conversations at, where we can expand those conversations. So
Yeah, I do. The more I hear from younger generations or meet people, I'm like, man, I think it's gonna be moving forward. I think there's gonna be a big wave of acceptance and a love and just kindness wave, because I just didn't know. Like I said, I grew up in a small town in Ohio. I just didn't have diversity. I didn't have anyone talking about it, and I didn't know what hardly any of it meant. And then as I've gotten older, I've embraced it all and learned as much as I can. But these kids these days are just, they're
They're brilliant,
so much,
right?
and they're so brilliant, and they're standing up. I mean, we have some friends here who they have a 6 year old um, um, kiddo, we'll say, and they go by he or them. And the 4 year old sister goes, I don't have a sister, I have a brother. And it's just
Mm,
that simple.
right,
It's not even
right,
a question. It's just,
right,
no, I have a brother.
right.
And other people would look at that and go, oh man, that's like brainwashing or whatever. And it's like, no, it's just that simple. Accept the person for who they want to be, what they identify as. But I see that happening in kids, and it's, we just learn to accept things as children, and
Absolutely.
I just see so much happening in this world that these kids are just standing up and being badasses like you at 7.
Absolutely. It's one of those tricky things because you think that you are in relationship with people and that you honor the family that you grew up in or the community and the foundation and culture that you were exposed to. And I can tell you as, a black woman who is in now her, the mid years of her life. I've been married for half of my life. I can also tell you that over the past 25 years, had I, for example, had I met my husband today, I would be like, you're a little homophobic, and we need to have some conversations around that, right? But those issues of homophobia didn't come up earlier in, our relationship before I had fallen in love and head over heels,
Yeah.
right? And so then you have to begin to establish what boundaries look like for yourself. And it came to, full circle for me personally when my one of my bonus children, she came out to me and she said, I know I can never tell my dad this, and I'm really looking to you for your support and help and making sure that he understands that I'm probably never going to have kids because I like girls. And I was like, okay, baby, let me let you know that if one, it's going to be okay,
Yeah.
right? And two, we will figure out how to broach that conversation with him when the time is appropriate, when you feel most comfortable, right? And so I would plant little seeds, just to, prepare him because I knew, the way he grew up, he's 10 years my senior. And I knew that the way he grew up was like, oh my gosh, very similar to how my dad grew up. Like, this
Sure.
is just not, and we put those people over here in a box and we just leave them there. And so I think when all of the conversations began to really come ahead was we now have a granddaughter who is 20, and she's always considered herself a tomboy, and she wants to be playing the sports and she wants to dress like the boys. And so when she was 16, I asked her, I said, do you consider yourself, and this is your choice, don't let anybody ever pressure you on how you identify. I was very emphatic, you don't even have to be a she.
Right.
He was like, Nana, you're giving me permission to, like, I'm like, absolutely. Like,
Hell
and so
yes.
we had this very, very open conversation about, would you ever consider top surgery? Would you, when you are looking at, your significant others, what do you consider them, in your, don't ever box yourself in. And, my husband overheard us having this conversation one time, and we had gone to bed later on that night, and he said, I'm beginning to understand. I don't get it all, but I'm beginning to understand. And I said, well, at the core of your understanding is the fact that will never change. You're going to always love her, regardless of how she shows up.
Yeah.
I'm going to make sure that she will never know that you're so confused as you are confused, because you're always in her presence going to know, she's going to know that you love her. And so that's, the kind of conversations that we have to begin to have with people who just don't get it or not, or
Right.
are not ready, right? So that's the, the dual, perspectives. And we have to like walk that fine line of how do you love someone who maybe now that I have more knowledge around a certain issue and I've established boundaries, like, there was a time where um older black men would say things like, as they were driving, if a person was Asian, oh, you're driving like an Asian person.
Hmm.
And that just meant that was that stereotype of you're driving slow or you don't know how to drive, right?
Right.
And so now in our household, you can't say those things, right? Because I had to say it enough times that, one, you don't even know what Asian that person is. So don't call all
Yeah.
Asians. I mean, he was because growing up in San Francisco where he grew up, he thought all Asians were Chinese. And so I was like, there are so many different Chinese, I mean, Asian Americans, and
Yeah.
then add Pacific Islander into there. You can't make that assumption. And so that really is the crux of having those hard, challenging conversations within community and outside of community.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's so beautiful. And I mean, that's why I like having this podcast to just have these conversations, because when I was looking at what was coming out of my hometown and
Mm.
that realm, there's just so much hatred and so much ignorance. And I was like, I can't be a part of this. I want to have these conversations. And even if those people aren't necessarily listening, that's not really my demographic, but it's always the target in my mind of who that I want to have hear these conversations. Because if you don't know, then you don't know, but that means you're just not educating yourself. So I've been to so many different places. I've been very fortunate to travel, and I was just like, there's so many beautiful people in this world and beautiful voices and different experiences. And every time I speak to somebody, I get to learn about their life. I get to learn about what they stand for, who they are, what life means to them, and it's really beautiful. And so I just wanted to have these conversations for myself, but also to be able to put these out and let some people hear from anybody all over the world, which I think is just really necessary for all of us, no matter where we come from.
And the beautiful thing about it is, one, that you have a title that is very inclusive of all humans, and the second thing is that I think that we don't give enough credit to is that eventually folks, when they're in spaces and they hear conversations like this being had, they get more knowledge around these nuanced conversations, and they will go back into those spaces where people may be a little bit more closed off, and they are the conduits, right? They are
Yeah.
charged with the responsibility of challenging. I tell folks all the time in my training sessions, wait till we get to the end of October, beginning of November, because I am tasking you at Thanksgiving to have that conversation with Billy Bob and Karen. I want you to say, like, this is unacceptable and that my children will not be raised this way. And have the courage. So I have people repeat that, like rinse and repeat. Let's just practice that. I want you to get the courage to say that to the people that you know and love, right? Because willful ignorance and intentional conscientious stupidity, Dr. Martin Luther King said that willful ignorance and conscientious stupidity do not get you off the hook for
Right.
not knowing. We can
Right.
no longer make the excuse that we don't know. We
Right.
all witnessed the knee to the neck of George Floyd. We
Right.
all witnessed that. So
Yeah.
we can't pretend that we don't know anymore.
Yeah. And if you're on the side, I've heard people on the other side be like, well, it's just the way the police are. And I'm like, dude, if you can't watch that and say that, if you can watch that without cringing through the whole thing, that's one thing. But then saying it wasn't murder, it's like, no, man. Like, and if you're saying that there's a wide range of issues with what you think is acceptable way to treat a human. And I just, like you said, it just doesn't. There's no room for that anymore, because technology comes at us so quickly, and within 2 seconds, less than 2 seconds, we can have thousands of articles if you want to learn something.
Absolutely.
And if you're not finding out about these things, if you're not educating yourself, that's on you.
Yeah.
Then you're actively you have to actively try not to learn these things. Yeah. All right, I'm going to change gears just for a second. I have a fun question I like to ask everybody on this podcast. If I came to you and no pandemic, anything, no travel restrictions, and I had a plane ticket, and I said, "You can go anywhere in the world with this plane ticket." Open-ended question: where would you fly to?
Ooh. I am like a daredevil when it comes to my social consciousness. And so right now in this moment, it would probably be and call me crazy, but it would probably be Palestine or Colombia, or
Okay.
maybe even Kenya. It would be somewhere where there is some social charge that's going on, to try to get a sense of, you know, getting to the root and the core of the problem, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, if I had that kind of, flexibility, I would be thinking like sky is the limit.
Yeah.
Like if I can go in and be impactful in those kind of situations, then there's nothing that we can't do about American racism.
Right. Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
way I think about it. Yeah.
I love that. I mean, it's just over our whole conversation that just speaks to you and who you are. I
Yeah.
love that answer. That's such a good answer. All right, two last questions for you. And the first is, what would you want the world to know about you?
Hmm. I would want the world to know that I am unpredictable, and I will I am always probably going to be the voice for those who don't get heard. Um, and people are always surprised, but I am the mommy of more than, I say, about 15 kids. I've birthed six into the world, and I just want to make sure that the world is a better place for them.
And that you're a badass.
they, they better know that from the moment that they meet me. Like I try, I really, it's hard for me not to leave that impression with people. Like
True.
I sit back in the cuts and I listen, and then the moment I open my mouth, they're like, "Oh, where did that come from?" I'm like, "Oh, I was in the corner listening, and what you were saying was quite not nice."
Oh man, I love that. I think that's so beautiful, especially quick dive into a little bit of my story. A little over 2.5 years ago, I was at the beginning stages of liver failure from my drinking. So I am now that 33 months sober as of yesterday, which is awesome. Thank
Absolutely.
you. But as I was in my hospital bed and I had been told that I didn't know if I had a night left at 33 years old, which is a hell of a thing to hear, um, it really just put life into perspective of like, okay, I can't be silent on issues anymore. I have to stand up because I have all these thoughts in my head and I just can't not speak out about them. Can't not stand up for people that need to be stood up. And I just finally looked into life and I was like, I need to leave an impact on this world. I just have to. When you see that, like literally I could not make it out.
Right.
It really puts it into perspective of like, okay, I'm gonna go at this and I'm going to make ripples in this world. I'm gonna spread as much love and beauty and I'm gonna make it a better place for everybody in this world because of my existence. And that doesn't mean I will solve all the world's issues, but I will put all the beauty I can into this world and have the conversations and meet people and smile, and when we can hug again, I will hug people. And yeah, it's just what shaped me to start having these conversations was
So,
I almost didn't have it anymore.
right.
And
Right.
we don't ever know when that's going to come at you. So you might as well start right now, like just get going with it. There's no time to waste.
Absolutely. My kids, to a certain degree, they've grown up with the privilege of growing up in a household with two parents. We've always been employed. They've never had to want for anything as far as like their needs are concerned. And so oftentimes my husband and I look at us and we are like, they are not living the lifestyle that we grew up in, right?
Yeah.
My husband, he grew up to a single mom. poverty, welfare, food stamps in San Francisco. He's worked since the age of 14.
Wow.
He was a teen dad. And then my only way of getting out of that stereotype of my community was I knew that I had to go to college. But because he was a teen dad, he felt like I couldn't do that because I had to go immediately into getting a real job to take care of
Right.
my, kids. And so we often look at them and are like, oh, you guys are such cupcakes. You have no idea of what it means to grow up in the life that we grew up in. And so I look at that and I see that they have almost like a desensitized perception of what struggle is, even though we remind them like this is the way we grew up and like we're not giving you this just because, right?
Yeah.
But it took my now 20-year-old, when George Floyd happened last year, he would go occasionally with me to marches and things, right? My younger ones, I can force still, right? You're too young
Yeah.
to tell me no. But in high school, it's like, do you want to go to this protest with mom? And he would be like, no, not today, mom. Thanks for inviting me. But when George Floyd happened, he was so like his conscience would not allow him not to do something. And he was out there day after day after day. And I was like, son, I have to warn you that this can be taxing. And I need you to be mindful of when, things like rage start to, bubble up inside of your spirit, and to really be reflective of self-care, because that's the piece that people, sometimes they'll be like, I'm going full out gung ho at this issue and I'm going to fight until the last breath of me. But we really have to be very conscious of what it means to take care of self. And
Yeah.
so it's important in these times that as we show up, that we also recognize things to take care of ourselves in these moments, because it's so, I mean, your story, your testimony, being able to say, there was a possibility where I couldn't be here, right? He would tell you that same thing. When he was a senior in high school, a young guy in our neighborhood decided to pull a gun out on he and his friends. And my son was the only Black kid in the group, and he put the gun to his head. And so my
Jesus.
son has flashbacks of that moment. And he recently came to me and he said, Mom, you will not believe it, but the kid that put the gun to my head is now in prison for doing it to someone else. And I said,
Wow.
are you kidding me? So we went to court. My son and the other kids, they testified. They had to relive that trauma.
Jeez.
They were all, Black and brown kids. But the kid, the individuals that eventually got this young kid, locked away, or at least to face the consequences, it unfortunately was a young white couple that the court system believed them. And so that's again that thing. Like I struggle with the carceral system in general. Like it is so inhumane. But
Yeah.
at the same time, what do you do with individuals who are intent on harming other people and even themselves in community? And so we have to at least make sure that the time fits the crime, so to speak, and believe in redemption. I totally believe in redemption. And so, while my son was telling me this story, like he's now in prison, it's like, okay, but you don't want him to be in prison for the rest of his life, because at the end of the day, he didn't take a life. He needs to have that time to process. We
Yeah.
need to be very intentional about restorative and transformative and community justice, rather than these cells that literally and figuratively kill the spirits of people.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing that story too. That's man, that is can't even imagine that, but I'm happy he's here as well
Yeah.
as me.
Yeah.
Man. All right. My last question for you is, if you had the ear of everybody in the world, what would you say to them?
My battle cry right now, the future is anti-racist. Like everywhere I go, that's my battle cry. The future is anti-racist, and what are you doing about it?
I love it.
And that's it.
That's so good. Well, thank you so much for your time. This has been so unbelievable to talk to you. It's been so nice chatting with you.
Absolutely. I appreciate you for having me on, Nick. It's a joy. I like having conversations that are substantive, right?
Same, yeah. It's nice. It's nice when you can meet a stranger and have two different views and two different pathways in life, and then you can meet up and have a beautiful conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day, and
Well,
thank you so much.
have a good one.
You too. Bye. Thank you for listening to the Beautifully Human podcast. To hear more beautiful stories from beautiful humans, follow us on Spotify and rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts. Follow us on Instagram at the Beautifully Human Podcast. Peace signs up.